Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chronic Fatigue and Burnout Recovery Podcast. In this episode today, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite and also very popular topics generally when it comes to chronic illness and fatigue recovery, which is the nervous system. Of course, I have talked about the nervous system many times on this podcast before, and you can probably just do a little search in the podcast for the word nervous system, and you'll find lots and lots of episodes that come up. But I think it's helpful to talk about the nervous system in different ways, because sometimes certain ways of hearing things or certain ways of expressing things connects with people differently, or by the time you listen to this episode compared to maybe some of the previous episodes you've listened to, you're in a different headspace, you've got a generally different understanding, and you might receive the information differently. So what I wanted to cover in this episode was just all the different ways you can support your nervous system. I obviously talk a lot about somatic work, being trained as a somatic experiencing practitioner. And I think a lot of the previous episodes have been strongly somatic focused, not always. But I'd like to just talk about some of the other ways you can support the nervous system and just answer some of the questions I also see constantly popping up on my social media about supporting the nervous system as well. But before we dive into the episode, as always, I just want to make a kind request to ask you to leave a review for the podcast. You can do this on Spotify just by leaving 5 stars. You can also do this on iTunes by leaving 5 stars. I think on iTunes, you can also write a little paragraph if there's something nice that you want to say about the podcast. And this really does help to improve the podcast ratings. And when we improve the podcast ratings, it means that more people find the podcast, they find the information, and they get the help that they need. Obviously, this podcast is not the be all and end all when it comes to chronic illness and managing a chronic illness, but I know a lot of people are finding the resources I share here really supportive, and we just want more people to find them and benefit from the resources that are available. So if you do have a moment and it is within your capacity now, just to pause for a moment and just leave that review, it would be very much appreciated. And then we will dive into the rest of the episode. So we're going to be talking about all the ways you can support your nervous system today. And I guess I just wanted to kind of touch base on a few sort of basic concepts when it comes to the nervous system. Something I got asked this week on my Instagram Q&A was, how do we know how much of our symptoms are being created by nervous system imbalances and how much are being created by other, what we would call maybe physiological or biochemical imbalances? And I always say, and this is, I appreciate a very frustrating answer most of the time, is that it depends. It really depends on the person. And I like to think that we're on some sort of continuum. So if we think about it as a sort of a line moving from the left-hand side of the page to the right-hand side of a page, where the left-hand side of the page is people who have a lot of symptoms which are very strongly rooted in the nervous system. And then on the right-hand side of the page, you have a lot of symptoms which are very much rooted in some sort of physiological imbalance or disease, a diagnosable disease, or some sort of biochemical imbalance. So it's much more about like nutrient deficiencies or infections or autoimmunity or toxins or molds or something in that kind of more what I would call physical realm. But then if we think about the very, very far left of that line and the very far right of that line, people are in between, where some of us are more on the left-hand side of the continuum, some of us are more on the right-hand side of the continuum, some of us are in the middle of the continuum, and every case is different. And I would also say that even within your chronic fatigue journey, is that it can be different at different times. Sometimes there can be a lot of symptoms being created by the nervous system. And when we address those nervous system symptoms, we improve health, and the nervous system is quite stable. But then the remaining symptoms are much more in the physiological realm, and then we need to do more work in that area. Or vice versa. Sometimes people balance their blood sugar, they deal with infections, they see a good amount of progress doing that type of physiological work, and then they kind of circle back to the nervous system work, and the nervous system work is what gives them the final, I guess, jump or leap or that final leg up in their journey that they really needed. I'll say this once, I'll say it again, and I'll probably never stop saying this, but chronic illness is complex and nuanced, and every case is different. There's no one formula or one recipe for success. It's very much about the individual and what the individual is experiencing in their unique journey and what that specific individual needs. In my business, a huge part of what we do, or what I do, and my team members do, is we do functional medicine and nutritional therapy. So we are working a lot with those biochemical and physiological mechanisms. But then in addition to that, I obviously have my somatic experiencing training that some people do alongside the nutritional therapy. Starting next month, we have Nicolina who's coming on board, and she's trained in the Safe and Sound protocol and compassionate inquiry with Gabo Mate. So there are some other mind-body tools we can offer our clients, but the primary business is built on functional medicine, nutritional therapy. And for the most part, therefore, people who are enrolling to work with us are people who are seeking that very specific type of support. But even within that, those people are doing their own therapy, their own nervous system work, or they need to do it, and then we're advising that they either do it with someone else or with us. So we all have different needs. And that's kind of what I wanted to elaborate on a little bit more today. But what I would say is that in the very beginning stages of this fatigue recovery experience, having some sort of nervous system toolbox or nervous system self-care box can be really important in terms of creating stability within the system. And I've spoken about stability many times in recent episodes, I believe, of the podcast, where I talk about this idea of syndromal patterns being systems which are very unstable. And therefore, in the beginning, our stages of our health journey, we want to create as much stability as possible. A big part of what we also do with our clients is creating that stability through blood sugar management, but also things like circadian rhythms and sleep and wake cycles, your light exposure during the day and pacing throughout the day. But nervous system work is part of that stabilizing toolbox. So we know that we should have some sort of nervous system self-care practice, but it could look different for everyone. I didn't find somatic experiencing in the very beginning of my journey. And if I look back on, my life and everything that I've kind of tried and experienced, I tried so many different things to support myself. Then somatic experiencing was the thing that my system really needed. Like, I had dabbled in pretty much everything I'm going to share with you in the rest of this episode, but nothing had really given me that change, that reprogramming on a deep level that somatic experiencing gave me. And that's why it is something that I am so passionate about, and why I am a big advocate for it for people with chronic illness or just people who want to live better lives. I think it's an incredible therapy. But that being said, I always try to check my biases. Having been through this experience myself and had my own journey, it could be very easy to just think everybody's like me. Everybody just needs to do what I did. But that's really not true. And I would say, like, a humble practitioner doesn't believe that there's any one way to do anything. And I do my best to be that humble practitioner. it's not sexy and it's not very marketable, because I see people marketing like this on social media and it's very black and white, all or nothing. And I think people like that because it's clear and it sells and it makes things sound simple. But it's also not true. Unfortunately, there is so much complexity and nuance to everything that I can never, ever, like, hand on heart say, oh, there's only one way to do things. I believe in kind of the basics, and I believe in some of the basic foundational elements, but I think there's a lot of nuance in all the space in between. So what I'm trying to say in a very rambled way, I think, is that even though I'm very passionate about somatic work, I always like to hold space for the fact that we can support our nervous system in many different ways. And really, it's down to the individual, I guess, to find the things that connect best with their symptoms or with their systems, shall I rather say. And so here, I thought I would just go through, maybe just starting off by talking about some of the things that I've tried, and then maybe add in some things that I haven't tried that you could also explore. So when I started to get into all of this stuff, I would say it was probably around about the time I started my online business. But even before that, I got into yoga. I was always a fitness person. I was a personal trainer in a gym. I always liked different types of movement. And I got into yoga and meditation probably about 7 years or so before I became unwell. So I was doing things like regular yoga classes, journaling, a little bit of meditation, just kind of like on Headspace initially. And then as time went on, I also started to do, I guess, more type of brain retraining, visualization types of meditation. So I was a big fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I actually went to one of his 3-day events in London. You basically just sit in a room with like hundreds of people and everybody does these really long meditations. And I did find them really, really useful, I guess, at the time. But I still got ill, even though I was doing my brain retraining, and even though I was doing all these visualizations and taking the time to do yoga and taking the time to journal and taking the time to meditate, I still got ill. So if we're arguing, at least in my case, that, it's all nervous system, it wasn't all nervous system. It could possibly have been the ways I was supporting my nervous system weren't necessarily the ways that I needed to. But there was so much more going on than that, because it wasn't like I wasn't trying in advance of being unwell to support my nervous system. So we've got things like journaling, we've got things like yoga, we've got things like meditation or visualization practices or neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, which is a lot of what the brain retraining courses are based on. And I actually also trained in NLP. I think I've probably mentioned that on this podcast before, but when you do, or at least when I did my nutritional therapy degree back in 2008, NLP was a compulsory course we had to take. So I was trained in NLP from the get-go of becoming a nutritional therapy practitioner. But I also, because I was so interested in the whole like mindset and self-development side of things, I also did some more advanced training in neurostrategies, where I flew to Florida for 5 days or was it Orlando for 5 days, and didn't leave the airport and just did like a really, really intense neurostrategies brain retraining program. And this was all before I became unwell. So we've got brain retraining, neuro-linguistic programming that we can do as well. And from a yoga perspective, there's obviously different types of yoga. So you can obviously have restorative yoga, which could be very, very supportive in terms of down regulating the nervous system and allowing that sensory deprivation and very deep restorative rest, which can be so supportive, especially in the earlier stages of the recovery journey. And in this podcast, I cannot remember the number off the top of my head, but I interviewed Charlotte Whiteman and we talk specifically about restorative yoga and her own journey with chronic fatigue and the restorative yoga practices that she offers. So feel free to search within the Spotify app, for example, for restorative yoga in this podcast, and that episode should come up. We've also got yin yoga. So yin yoga is less restorative than restorative yoga because you are creating a little bit more tension in the body, but the majority of the poses are seated or lying down, so it can still be quite supportive for the nervous system. And I trained in yin yoga as well, so it was something that I used a lot in my own journey and I found it very supportive. But I can imagine that if you're completely new to yoga, it could be a little bit difficult to manage because you need to know your body quite well. And for some people, for example, people with hypermobility, it could be inappropriate for their body. So with these types of things, you always want to check with an appropriately trained exercise specialist when you're trying something new that involves movement and you already have a chronic health condition. So in my own journey, I found probably out of all those things that I mentioned, the journaling, the meditation, the brain retraining, and the visualization type work, I found yin yoga and restorative yoga were probably the most helpful things for me at the time I was doing them. And I think that was just really due to the sensory deprivation. Like I wasn't looking at my phone. I wasn't looking at a computer screen. I wasn't looking at the TV. And then the therapeutic benefits on the nervous system of being lying down, consciously aiming to relax the body. The body-based element of the work was really supportive versus something, for example, like journaling, which can be a bit more cognitive, meditation, which can be a bit more cognitive, visualization and brain retraining, which can also be cognitive. I think there's definitely a time and a place for these things, and they can be really helpful for some people. But for me personally, I really needed to get out of my head and more into my body, and doing things like yin and restorative yoga were very supportive for my nervous system and really allowed me to rest when it was difficult to switch my mind off. So instead of trying to use my mind to control my mind, I was working more with the body. And I think that's why I've connected so much more to somatic work as well. We obviously have other types of movement practices as well, which can be a little bit more upregulating. So like some gentle hatha yoga, or even moving in towards some gentle vinyasa yoga, that maybe in someone who has a little bit more physical capacity later on in their journey could be supportive for the nervous system. Or something like Qigong. I also did a little bit of Qigong, which again is a movement-based practice. So it might not be appropriate if you're not ready to move in that way. But if you are ready to move, having the gentle, slow movements can actually feel very, very supportive for the nervous system, especially if you're the type of person who's kind of like tired but wired. You've got a lot of like activation in the system, and actually doing some movement helps it to discharge. That's where having some kind of movement-based practice, which is gentle and appropriate for your level of capacity, could maybe be really supportive for your nervous system as well. So we've talked about journaling. The other thing I haven't touched on, but is kind of related to this whole meditation, yoga side of things, is breathing. And breathing is probably one of the main ways in which we can control our autonomic nervous system. If we really slow down and focus on our breath and focus on slowing down the breath and breathing into our belly and exhaling for longer than we inhale, that can really help to calm and settle the nervous system. The caveat to that is there can also be up-regulating breathwork practices. So there can be breathwork practices like in yoga we have the Kapalabhati breath, which is a very kind of fast, forced exhale through the nose. Or I also trained in transformational breathwork. I've done a lot of courses, which is again a very like forced and uncomfortable breath where we breathe in and out through the mouth, and it's almost like a workout, but you do it lying down. And in that case, what we're actually doing is we're bringing more activation into the body. And bringing more activation into the body isn't always a bad thing. We think about nervous system work as being things that calm the nervous system or soothe the nervous system or settle the nervous system. And that is important at times. And I would say that's an important foundation for nervous system work, is to be able to calm and settle and soothe. But when we're looking at building capacity within the nervous system, we also want to be able to start to challenge it. And that's where these up-regulating practices, like doing a little bit more movement or like doing more of an up-regulating breathwork practice, which are more stimulating to the system, can be helpful for building capacity. And in some cases, like the transformational breathwork, it can also help with discharging survival responses, so fight, flight, and freeze, which are being held in the body, or it can just help with like release. Sometimes people will cry, sometimes people will see visions, sometimes people will get some sort of layer of deeper healing when they're doing breathwork practices, which can feel really supportive for their system. I guess the sort of things to be aware of, and this is actually one of the reasons why I stopped teaching the transformational breathwork, is because sometimes what happens is people go into those transformational breathwork practices and it's too much for them. They haven't built enough stability in their system first, and then they go into an up-regulating breathwork practice and it's too much for the nervous system to handle, and they can feel worse or have a crash later on. In a similar way that if somebody was to go and do some exercise before their system was stable enough to tolerate the exercise, they may have a crash or have some post-exertional malaise afterwards. So the same could be true for up-regulating practices like up-regulating like transformational breathwork or more intense breathwork regimes, shall we say. So we always have to be careful of what we're choosing and how we're dosing things. And I think it's important that we build that stability, that foundation first before we do things that challenge the system. So when we're working with practices that help to calm and settle and stabilize the system, that's where we want to start. And that might be like your restorative yoga, maybe your yin yoga, maybe some calming breath work, or some calming meditation if you find meditation helpful. Not everybody does, before you go into something that's challenging. And so on that note, maybe then also just saying that meditation can be really hard for some people. If you are very, very activated, having to sit still and focus when there's a lot of energy in your system can be too uncomfortable. For me, I used to try and do these long meditations, but actually what was happening is I was actually getting too activated by the meditations. And it would have been much better for me just to do some restorative yoga than try and focus my mind on a meditation. Conversely, if you're somebody who is more prone to dissociation, and you can like really go like very deep into your meditation practice and almost get like lost in your meditation practice, sometimes that continues to strengthen the disassociation or continues to strengthen some of the freeze. And therefore, even though it's really pleasant and enjoyable to be in that meditation practice for some people, it's not to say that they shouldn't do it, but it's to balance it with some other things that actually allow them to be more present and embodied. So that's another caveat when it comes to meditation. But on the topic of this upregulation, because we were talking about how certain things can be upregulating for the system, and that can actually be potentially beneficial in terms of building capacity, we also have things like hot and cold exposure. So when the system is stable enough, we can challenge it. We can challenge it with exercise, yes, but we can also challenge it with exposing ourselves to cold water or exposing ourselves to heat stress. Like for some people, it might even be just starting with a hot bath, or it could be then, using a sauna, whether that's infrared or a traditional wood fire sauna. The heat is another way that we can challenge the nervous system. And like with anything, it's all about the dosage. So some of my clients who can't tolerate a sauna, I'll say, well, could you go in for 1 minute? And they're like, yes, I could go in for 1 minute. And sometimes we can actually just use these very, very slow titrations to build up capacity within the system. It's almost like this rule of what you can't do is what you should do, but it's about taking just like a very, very, very tiny dose. Like when we can't exercise because we get post-exertional malaise, we strip it right back and we do something really small. And once we've mastered that something really small, then we can add in a little bit more and a little bit more over time. So those are just some ways that we can start to build capacity in the system, which is by doing more upregulating breathwork practices, doing more upregulating practices like the Hatha yoga or Qigong, and also heat and cold stress as well. Then some other things I have on my list are also just traditional talking therapy. Some of my clients do talking therapy. They find it incredibly helpful. I've also seen people do talking therapy and not find it helpful at all. And in some cases also potentially be quite harmful in the sense that it can bring a lot up to the surface that the body doesn't have the capacity to process. And this is another reason why I'm a big fan of somatic work, especially if you're working with a somatic practitioner who's also trained in something like psychotherapy and who can blend the two together. Then you can get the benefit of the talking therapy, but with the slowness and attentiveness and the opportunity for integration that you would maybe get from working with a somatic practitioner. There's also things like hypnosis. That could be another practice worth exploring. Again, I've seen hypnosis also bring things up for people that they haven't been able to or haven't had the capacity to integrate. So we need to be mindful of that. And a lot of people do things like EFT, emotional freedom technique, or EDMR, which is another trauma therapy. And again, these can be really helpful for people. And I think sometimes it's also a case of connecting to your intuition and just trusting what could potentially be beneficial for you. In my own journey, I just had this instinct before I discovered the somatic work that I needed to do craniosacral therapy. And I found a craniosacral therapist online. I went to go and see her. And then the moment we met, I was like, yes, I'm in the right place. It was like my body just knew this was for me. And we worked together for about 9 months, and the work we did was really helpful. It was like that work was just at the beginning of then starting to do more of the somatic work. So I did the craniosacral therapy, and then the next thing I started to do was the somatic work, and the two piggybacked off really nicely from each other. So craniosacral therapy is a touch-based therapy. Other touch-based therapies also include neuroaffective touch, and even you can have body work like just massage if you find that helpful, reflexology if you find that helpful. And in my training in somatic experiencing, we also do somatic experiencing, but in a touch-based format as well, which I've spoken a little bit about previously on the podcast, but for me, again, that's just something that my body really, really connects well with. And for people with very tricksy nervous systems who find it really difficult to work on their nervous system, I think the touch-based work can be particularly powerful. So something else worth considering there. And then some of my clients also do things like Reiki. They do various energy healing. You've also got plant medicine. Those are other things that can also potentially be supportive. And I also did for a while, this was actually before I became ill, but I did something called network spinal analysis, NSA, which is a chiropractic technique. So it is touch-based, I guess, to a certain extent, but it's about applying a very, very specific amount of pressure to a very, very specific part of the body to encourage the body to heal and reorganize itself. And it works with the nervous system. But as I said, I did this for, I think, through 2 or 3 years. I was doing it within the first year that I was ill. And then my practitioner moved away and closed his practice and moved away. So it wasn't something I continued with. But despite doing all of that, I still really didn't get the health that I wanted. Well, I got ill and then I didn't obviously get better until I started doing the somatic work. So again, I just say that because that was my experience, but it's also worth trying all of these different things and really find the thing that resonates most with your system. And then the final things I have on my list are time in nature and time with animals. And so this is one of the things I talk about quite a bit with the members of the Nurturing Resilience community, which is the nervous system program that I run. And it's something I talk about a lot with my clients, is that our life is happening now. And we don't want to think about our like we're doing our healing and then we're going to live. But we really want to blend our life with our healing. So yes, we're on this healing journey, and yes, we're also living. And it's really about finding those things that help your system feel better resourced. Time in nature is such a big one for me, especially living on the southwest coast of England, right by the sea. If there's a day goes by when I don't go and see the sea, I feel it. Like I have to go and see the sea every day. Like, what's the sea doing today? Is it rough? Is it flat? Is it shiny? What's happening today on the beach? I need to see that. And that for me is something that really fills up my cup, so to speak. And so what I say to my clients is a huge part of working on your nervous system is starting to identify all of those things that fill up your cup every single day, whether that is, that moment where you go and sit in the garden and you feel the sun on your face, to that cuddle with your pet. If you have one, I've got 2 little black cats, whether it is your favorite mug of herbal tea, your favorite herbal tea in your favorite mug with your favorite cozied up in your favorite blanket. We're really just starting to identify those things that continue to send those safety signals to the body. So yes, I've been talking about journaling and meditation and breath work and this. And I used to do those things like they were boxes that needed to be ticked. So I used to do my yoga, I used to do my journaling, I used to do my meditation, I used to do my NLP, and all the different things that I've mentioned. But it was like tick, 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 tick. It wasn't necessarily embodied safety. So I could have been doing none of those things. I could have been doing no journaling, no meditation, no yoga. But I could have really been paying attention to the things in my life that helped to signal safety. But instead, I wasn't. I was doing all of the things I thought I should be doing because they are, air quotes, the things that support your nervous system, and paying less attention to, how is my system feeling day to day? Are the choices that I'm making supportive for me? Are the people that I'm spending time with supportive for me? Am I putting too much pressure on myself? And so I guess that's kind of like where I want to finish up, because this kind of inspiration comes again from a question which was asked on social media this week, which was someone who said, I'm doing all the things for my nervous system, this, and this. I can't remember what they were, but the usual meditation, somatic work, yoga, journaling, sunlight, etc. What else should I be doing? And I kind of felt like really curious about, well, maybe nothing else. Maybe you're even doing too much, because it's less about, especially when we're working with syndromal systems, sensitive systems, unstable systems, less is more. So it's not about, I'm not getting better, what else can I do? It's about, I'm not getting better, is what I'm doing really supportive for my system or not? Now, sometimes we do need to do more. There are sometimes blind spots and other things we need to be working on, other things we need to be addressing. But sometimes we're also trying to tick too many boxes at once, and it's just becoming this like laundry list of healing modalities instead of an embodied experience of more coherence and connection and safety. And so, wrapping up this episode, I've talked about all sorts of things that you can explore. And the whole purpose of exploring these things is ultimately to bring you a greater connection to your sense of self, to a greater connection to the quality of coherence in the body, and the feeling in your body that you are a little bit more open, a little bit more expanded, a little bit more settled, and that there's capacity there for challenge. Whichever of these modalities you choose to use or work with, you know it's right for you when you feel that appreciable change in your system, the appreciable change of, this feels nourishing to me. This feels supportive for me. This feels like it's filling up my cup. And it's not a drag to pull myself into my meditation. And it's not a drag to do my yoga practice or do my journaling. It should be something that feels easeful, joyful, pleasurable. We know when we're having a chronic illness experience that so much gets taken away from us. And therefore, we really want to be leaning into those experiences that give us those tiny little pieces of joy. It might not be the big, massive things that all your friends or family are doing, but what are those small little things that you can be doing each day that help you to connect to the essence of who you are, irrespective of your diagnosis, your condition, your symptoms, or anything else you're experiencing. But you just want to allow yourself to be more of you, irrespective of the other things that are going on in your life. So I hope this episode has been helpful in some way. For me, it's felt like a little bit of a ramble. It is Friday afternoon. Work has been so busy lately. There's just so much on the go, which is my own fault because I have just taken on so many new clients. I think a lot of people don't always appreciate how tough it is to work with chronic cases because people are looking at you and expecting you to have all the answers, which I don't. I don't think anybody does. And you're helping people make really important decisions about their healthcare. At the same time, holding space for all the technical knowledge and the mechanisms and the biochemistry, and then also holding space for the fact that you've got a human being who's relying on you with their own emotional experience that needs to be held. And it's a lot. And when you're working with a lot of people every week and you're riding the waves of the ups and downs of their journey and their emotional roller coaster with them, it really takes a huge amount of capacity. I'm so grateful for my somatic experiencing training because I would not have the capacity to do this work without it. And that's the honest truth. But what I'm trying to say is that it's Friday afternoon and this is the first opportunity I've had this week to record the podcast because I haven't had another moment of time to do so. So, I did actually wake up this morning and go, I need to record a podcast today, but I've got no idea what to talk about. And I've been thinking about it all day and I came up with this idea for the episode, wrote a few little notes on my phone and came here to talk to you. So I hope it hasn't been too much of a ramble. I hope there's been something useful to be gained from this episode. If not, I will try and do better in the next one. But wishing you a wonderful fatigue recovery day. I hope there's one small thing you can go away and do for your nervous system later after listening to this that will just help you reconnect with yourself and find a greater sense of ease and safety and connection and coherence. I will see you in the next episode.